Everyone. My name is Mary Eleanor Power, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications with Dalhousie University's College of Continuing Education. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all Treaty people. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Excelling as a Leader, Ethics and Strategy in Practice. Today's webinar is a great introduction to our Leadership Excellence Certificate, which has been created and developed in partnership with CCE and the Business Excellence Institute. The next course, Mastering Strategy, begins on January 6th, so I would encourage everyone to explore that further. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists for today's webinar. First, John Bork. John is the president of the Business Excellence Institute, the only global membership body for business excellence professionals. A seasoned senior business leader and entrepreneur with over 30 years experience in a wide range of industries and countries. He has worked in both large multinationals and small companies, founded 3 businesses, and consulted for governments and companies such as Google. John holds a BSc in Applied Physics and a Master's in Business and Management Research and an MBA. He is a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, a certified management consultant, and an excellence assessor with experience assessing public and private sector organizations. And next, Ian Messenger. Ian joined the United Kingdom's Serious Organized Crime Agency in 2008 as an international operations officer with responsibility for international and multilateral investigations through Interpol and Europol. He was later seconded to the UK's Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre, where he served as their international liaison officer. Between 2011 and 2016, Ian served as a lead officer in the UK National Crime Agency's Intelligence and Operations Directorate. Ian obtained his MA Honours in Social Policy and Politics and his MSc in Criminology and Criminal Justice from the University of Edinburgh, and his doctorate in, Doctor of Criminal Justice, from the University of Portsmouth. In 2014, Ian completed the Certificate in Police Leadership from Dalhousie University. In 2016, Ian and his family relocated to Ontario. And since 2016, Ian has taught leadership and ethics courses at a number of higher education institutions in Canada. And finally, Dr. Diane Tyers. Dr. Tyers is the Dean of the College of Continuing Education at Dalhousie University and brings over 28 years of experience in the adult education sector to the position in a wide variety of roles nationally and internationally. Pardon me. She strongly believes that clear, simple, and consistent operational processes are the starting point to providing cutting-edge, creative, and wide-reaching lifelong learning programming. Diane completed her PhD at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. She has an MBA from the Ivey School of Business and University of Western Ontario and a Master's of Arts from the University of Queensland. She is a Fellow of the Business Excellence Institute, a member of LEAD 50/50 for Women in International Education, and a member of the Academy of International Business. What a pleasure it is to have such a veteran panel joining us for today's webinar. And I hope that you enjoy the next 40 minutes or so. And now, Dr. Tyers, I will pass it on to you to get us started.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mary Eleanor. So we'll just quickly walk through what we're going to cover today. We will talk about the Certificate in Leadership Excellence and just the whole concept of excellence in leadership. And then we'll give you a taste of some of the hands-on activities from the courses. One is the trolley problem. You'll do that with Ian. And then John will walk us through course design and then a second activity, Who's a Great Leader. And then we'll open it up to question and answer about anything that we've talked about on the webinar. So I will jump in. If you could take it to the next slide there, Mary Eleanor. So the Certificate in Leadership Excellence is consists of 3 courses. Each one is 11 weeks long, and they're all fully online. And there's 1 course in leadership, 1 course in ethics, and 1 course in strategy. And if you could give me the next slide, Mary Eleanor, there's a reason that we put these 3 pieces together to create a Certificate in Leadership Excellence. These 3 pieces are what we need in order to function effectively as a leader in today's context. Because if you could get me to the next slide, Mary Eleanor. In today's context, it is extremely challenging to lead because the environment that we're operating in and the environment that our organizations operate in is what we call VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So there's very, very little certainty in the environments that we're operating in. And so this lack of uncertainty, this complexity, the ambiguity, and just the volatility, the speed at which things can change, makes it very, very difficult for organizations to plot a course and kind of stay that course without having to pivot and make changes. And so in order to navigate and be successful in this environment, our organizations have become more and more complex. They have to be very dynamic and they have to be very adaptive. And this type of organization requires a very different type of leadership than the type of leadership required even 5 years ago. And the events of COVID have just kind of magnified the demands on leadership in organizations across all different sectors, whether it be higher education, manufacturing, technology, and so on. Every organization really is being pressured to be dynamic, adaptive, and to deal with that complexity. So this creates a need for a very, very different type of leader. And that's what we've designed these 3 courses to help participants become. So in order to be a leader that can lead an organization that is complex, dynamic, and adaptive, we need a basic grounding in leadership skills. We need an understanding of strategy, and we need an understanding of ethics. But we don't just need to understand them, we actually need to be able to do them. And John will talk later about how we've built this doing component into our courses. But the objective of the certificate and of these courses really is to help participants become the leaders that organizations today really need. And as I say, this has been completely magnified by COVID. So I'll turn it over to Ian, and I think Ian's going to jump in and give us a demonstration from one of the courses, from the ethics course.
Yes, thank you, Diane. My name's Ian Messenger. I'm the instructor on Ethics in Action, the ethics component of this certificate. Throughout the course, we do a lot of hands-on practical scenarios which generate a lot of discussion. And I thought I would like to share one example of the problems we discussed today. It's a problem that comes back to the 1960s, but it was first proposed by Philippa Foot, and it's an example of ethics that's really stood the test of time. It's called the trolley problem, and I'd like you to visualize this scenario as I talk you through it. Imagine you're watching a runaway trolley which is barreling down the tracks straight towards 5 workers on the track who can't escape. You happen to be standing next to a switch which will divert the trolley onto a second track. But here's the problem. That track has a worker on it as well, but there's only one worker. So the question is, what do you do? Do you sacrifice one person to save 5 people? And if we could have the poll, Mary Eleanor, that would be great. Not sure. Can we see the poll on the screen?
No, it hasn't come up, Ian. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure where Mary Eleanor is.
Okay,
Let's
that's no problem. I can continue.
Do you want to read the question out, and then we'll just poll in the chat?
Sure thing. So the question that is posed in this scenario is, what would you do? Would you flip the switch and divert the trolley onto the second track, which would ultimately result in one worker dying, or would you do nothing? Right. In over 90% of in a survey which was conducted as a response to this particular problem, over 90% of respondents said it was okay to flip the switch. It was okay to let one worker die at the expense to save the 5 other individuals. And various other studies, including a virtual reality simulation of this exercise has also shown the same results. These findings are consistent with one of the key ethical theories that we discuss on the course, which is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism argues basically that the morally correct decision is the one that maximizes well-being for the greatest number of people. In this particular scenario, the 5 lives outweigh the 1, even if achieving that outcome involves condemning someone to death. Of course, this is a hypothetical scenario. People don't always take this view, which is why if we modify the trolley problem just slightly, we really see a change. So imagine, rather than standing beside the track, standing beside a switch, you are standing on a bridge. And you're standing on a bridge which is over the track, and you can see this runaway trolley approaching. In this scenario, there is no second track. There's just one track. But there is an individual standing on the bridge next to you. If you push that individual off the bridge, his body will stop the trolley, saving the 5 individuals. But in the course of doing this, he will die. So to ask the same question, in this scenario, what would you do? Would you push the man off the bridge, or would you do nothing?
Now I will launch the poll here. And apologies, we can go back to the poll. I was kicked out of Zoom and had to come back in. So my apologies, technical error there, but we'll launch the poll now. So we have 50% of people who have voted. So I just encourage the others to add in their responses. Okay. Any other final responses? Okay, so we'll end the poll there. So we had 3 people contribute, but 2 said do nothing and 1 said push.
And that's very consistent actually with the findings of other studies. What's really interesting in this variation of the scenario is if you are a utilitarian, there is in theory no difference between the 2 scenarios. If you are a utilitarian, it's about maximizing the greatest good. So losing 1 life to save 5. In theory, if you were a utilitarian, you would opt to push the man off the bridge, thus stopping the trolley, thus saving the 5 lives at the expense of 1. What's really interesting in this scenario is that the same study, if we look back at the earlier study where 90% of respondents said they would flip the switch, in this variation of the scenario, only 10% of respondents actually said it's okay to push the man off the bridge. And this is really an ethical conflict that we have, because our instincts tell us that causing a deliberate death or causing someone to die through our actions is different than allowing them to die as a collateral damage, which is what we saw in the first scenario. We we would flip a mechanical switch rather than push another human being. Which, when we look at the theory of utilitarianism, there is no difference. And this is the kind of scenario that we discuss on the course, and we explore a range of different theories and ethical perspectives. And this is the type of discussion that we actually engage, and we really do have a very lively dialogue in the courses as we not just explore these two scenarios, but each student also brings different variations of these scenarios as well. In the first scenario, when we talked about the one individual versus 5 individuals, we often discuss, who are these individuals? Who is this one individual versus who are these 5 individuals? Is the one individual a good person? Is the one individual a bad person? Does the one individual contribute more to society than the 5 on the track? Would potentially saving the one person actually deliver greater good than saving the higher number of individuals? These are all ethical questions, ethical considerations that we explore, and really we can contrast this with a wide range of other scenarios. It's certainly a very hands-on course, very interactive course, and as we see from this example, certainly a very visual course as well.
Ian, I wonder if we can go back to the first, where you just touched on the first scenario, if we can go back to the first poll and have people contribute their thoughts to it, given that we missed that opportunity. So I wonder if I could just launch that, revisit that first question.
No problem.
Now,
So
what would you do? Would you switch the track or do nothing? So that was the first scenario. And so I just wonder about launching the poll here, and people can contribute to it. Then we can see how people would react, and perhaps now that they've had a few minutes to digest, we'll see what they have to say.
And so, while people are filling that in, I'm wondering if I can throw this out to either Ian or John, that these types of questions they're daily types of decisions that we face as leaders. Not that it's life and death, are we going to let a trolley hit someone or not, but just decisions in which there are competing priorities, and there's ambiguity, and maybe we don't have all the information we need. We don't know what types of individuals these are versus are not. I'm wondering if I could throw it over to either Ian or John to comment, how does this relate to decisions that we make on a daily basis as a leader?
That's a great question, Diane, and it really it's very reflective of the situations we as leaders find ourselves in. If you recall, I was giving some variations and some examples of the questions that our students have asked. Who are these individuals? Who is the one person? Who are the 5 people? And throughout our discussions, throughout discussing different variables, we keep coming back to the central theme that we don't know. We don't have all the information. We have to make a decision based on what we know and what we believe is right or wrong in our ethical and moral codes. What's interesting with this example is when we break down who makes those decisions, we see that men, for example, are more likely than women to say it's okay to push the man off the bridge. In one study, people were more willing to push someone off the bridge if they were a man rather than if they were a woman. In no study have we identified the backgrounds of those individuals. But it really shows that there's some aspects of our decisioning where we have a feeling what is right and what is wrong.
And John, would you have anything to add there? Or?
Well, I mean, my initial sort of reflection on that is also it's not just about the gender of the individual and the gender of the individual who might get pushed. There's always a cultural component as well. And it does depend if I am speaking as somebody who's Irish or somebody who's Canadian or perhaps I'm from a culture that is more group focused as opposed to individually focused. So the cultural component and the overall context can also play a part. When you posed the question originally, it did resonate with me, the sort of link between that question and all three of these courses, because these courses really aren't designed to be just anybody who's presented with this decision, what would they do? It's now, what would you, as a person in a leadership position, having taken these courses, make as your decision? And the courses here, they're designed to sort of facilitate that. If we come back to a quotation, which I'll paraphrase, from a chap who was approximately called Publius Cyrus, born somewhere in Syria or Turkey over 2,000 years ago. He said that when the waters are calm, anybody can be at the helm of a boat.
Yep.
And he'd know, because he was a slave who was brought to Rome, later was given his freedom and became a figure in the Roman Empire. So what we're saying is, when you're in this situation and you are presented with a situation that could potentially cause life and death for people, that's a situation where the waters aren't calm. And now how you would deal with that, how you are equipped to deal with it, is something which the courses are sort of moving you towards being able to deal with these challenges. But yeah, so the only thing that would immediately kind of come to my mind to supplement what Ian had said on topic exactly would be, of course, the cultural component that matters as well.
Yeah, and I know we need to go to the poll result, Mary Eleanor, but one of the reasons why this really resonates with me is when I became a new leader, and when I was in my first leadership positions, I used to completely stress myself out over literally screaming into an empty room, what's the right decision? Because I didn't have the information I needed, and I had very ambiguous situations, and I was having to weigh a lot of values and things like that, and I was so stressed out, what's the right decision? And I actually came to the conclusion that there is no perfect right decision. You simply make the decision that you can at that moment in time, based on everything in your toolbox, and then you make that decision as right as possible. So that was one of my big learnings as a new leader was, you make a decision based on what you know at that point in time and everything in your toolbox, and including your ethical considerations, and then you have to go with it. Because that you did the best you could at that point in time. Yeah. Mary Eleanor, did we get some votes cast in the first poll?
Yes. So people, two people identified switching the track, and one identified doing nothing. So
I'm wondering if we could just take 2 minutes, if the person who said do nothing, if you wouldn't mind, or if whoever voted, if you wouldn't mind kind of just jumping in for a quick comment, why did you vote the way you did? I don't know if anybody wants to
submit it in the chat here. If you want to add that in the chat, that would be great.
Yeah, and possibly if you want to do it, you could do it privately just to Mary Eleanor, in case you don't want your name to be put forward to our group.
Okay, no one wants to jump in. That's okay. Okay, well, for the sake of time, we'll jump over to John, and he'll talk a little bit more about pieces that we built into the course design. Over to you there, John.
Right, thanks, Diane. So I suppose the first thing to say really about the course design is that these courses have been designed to be demanding. Now, that doesn't mean that they're hard from the point of view of being cognitively or intellectually difficult, but they are demanding in the meaning of there's a lot of learning in them. And therefore, it's like anything that you have as an investment. The more you put in, the more you're going to get back out of them. So the real, I suppose, primary function behind these things was to make these courses have plenty of value to offer. And rather than this be something which should be daunting, it should really be exciting, because it means they're really worthwhile because they have so much to offer. And this concept of being demanding, it's also really what these courses need to be. They sort of must be like this. Excuse me. They must be like this if you're striving for excellence, because by definition, excellence is not average. Excellence is not typical. So if you want to become excellent in these areas, you can't just take an average course or a typical course, because then there's going to be nothing to differentiate them or make you, having gone through that learning experience, be outstanding. So to really move towards a position of being an excellent leader, the courses are demanding, and that means as somebody going into them, to get the most benefit out of them, you need to rise to that challenge and you know, ask of yourself more than what maybe another course might ask of you, and accept that challenge and benefit as much as you can from it. So to that end, the courses have been designed to enable those people really wishing to achieve excellence to make significant progress on the journey to doing so. And this means that they've been built to help people, as we can see in the slide here, learn not only about the topics, not only knowledge, not only about things, but also about how to apply that knowledge. So this means we don't, in the leadership course, just learn about leadership. We also learn about how to lead. And that concept is pretty important, because some of the knowledge is tacit knowledge. It's like swimming. You're never going to be able to learn how to swim by reading a textbook. So we learn about how to lead as well as about leadership. We learn about strategy, but we also learn how to be strategic and how to think strategically. And in the ethics course, which Ian has been discussing, we don't only learn about ethics, but we also learn how to navigate ethical dilemmas such as the one that was just presented. So, okay, I think maybe if we go to the next slide, please, Mary-Eleanor. All of this learning about how to apply really means that we have to go beyond just reading information and setting ourselves some little exercises. We have to go into, to get that application, active learning. So experiential learning, which we've pulled out here on the right-hand side of the slide, experiential learning that harnesses the power of social learning, where we're all learning from each other, and problem-based learning, where we learn from trying to overcome challenges and problems that we are presented with in groups as part of teams, learning from each other. And the final part of this image here is contextual learning. And there's a lot of contextual learning in these courses as well, which is really important, because that helps bridge the gap between being something that I've read or something that I've been told and something that I can see how it applies to me, how it fits into my world at work, or indeed my world socially, how it fits into my context. So by contextualizing and by bringing these contextual learnings to the fore, it helps us understand the theory as it applies for us. And then this really has a massive impact on the transfer of that learning into practice. So as a result of this combination of experiential active learning, which means we're getting the tacit components of knowledge as well as the explicit, the social and problem-based learning, and the contextual learning, which helps us understand how to apply it in our domain, be that in the public sector or in a small startup. I would give an example perhaps of you know, being somebody fighting a forest fire, or somebody coming up with a new way to light fires because matches have gone out of fashion. So all of that learning and those learning methodologies have been brought into these courses. And as a result, there's a lot of instructor interaction and instructor facilitation and Ian is the instructor for the Ethics in Action course, and he will be spending quite a lot of his time on a week-by-week basis for people on that course, interacting with them. These courses, they are not just, I'm going to sit down and read something, I'm going to write something and do some exercises. They are quite demanding because they really ask a lot of you in multiple dimensions. In the leadership course, for example, there's the explicit knowledge, the stuff we need to learn about the theory. There's some self-reflection where we need to learn about ourselves. But then there's also actually putting this into practice, where we have got to learn about how we will lead. And that requires us taking some of these learnings and actually living them during the course, and then closing the feedback loop, seeing how we could improve them and do better. So that's basically a little bit of an overview on the course design. Looking at the time, I think we still have a little bit of time if we go to the next slide, just to give a very simple example. So from the leadership course and the strategy courses, most of the active interactions and engagements, active learning, takes place over a longer period than we have time for now. Indeed, in one case, it takes place over 8 weeks. But in the very early stages of the leadership course, a very simple starting point to start people thinking about things is, we ask the question, who do you consider the greatest leader of all time to be? So maybe if a few of you would please just type into the chat here, just choose somebody quickly in 10 or 15 seconds who you think the greatest leader ever was. Okay, I see one person has typed in here, Martin Luther King Jr. Somebody else has said Princess Diana. Diane has said Princess Diana. Nothing to do with similarity of names there.
Nothing to do with the name. Nope.
Nobody else yet. We'll give it, okay. So somebody here says Barack Obama and Jack Layton, and that's fine. I mean, it's two people instead of one, and you know, it's really hard in 10 seconds to choose one individual, so it's okay. And maybe, okay, I'm Muhammad Ali from Mary Eleanor, I guess it is. So if we could go to Julie, Julie, choose Barack or Jack, either one of them or both, but could you please just type in why you chose that person? What was it that made you decide that that person was the greatest leader of all time? Empathy and compassion. Okay, that's really good. And I'm going to ask Diane, who's able to speak, to maybe answer the question as well. And in parallel.
Yeah, actually fairly similar to what Julie wrote too. Empathy, compassion, ability to relate to people, and just her honesty and vulnerability. She was never afraid to say, hey, here are my weaknesses as well as my strengths.
Okay. And I suppose, as will be soon reflected to you on Netflix with the latest season of The Crown. Okay, so I know Neil. He is a colleague, so I don't need to ask him. And maybe Mary Eleanor, if you would come out with your why for choosing Muhammad Ali.
I think just such a tremendous influence, strong in his convictions, who transcended far beyond his kind of skills, athletic skills, and really kind of was part of and an important figure in kind of a larger social movement. So I mean, really kind of summarize my thoughts in terms of his leadership and his enduring impact. You know, that people, you know, continue and will continue to see him and understand his history and understand his life and learn from it.
Okay, thank you. So typically, if you've got a larger group of people, you're going to get many different leaders and many different reasons. And most of the time, if you categorize the reasons why people choose these individuals as the greatest leader of all time, excuse me, you can either find that it's because of what that individual has achieved, and a little bit Mary Eleanor's response there about the enduring impact goes into that box. Not quite black and white, because the answer Mary Eleanor gave was long and had plenty of nuance. And things like empathy and compassion, that's a little bit more about how people lead as opposed to what they have achieved. And what you can start to get a feel for in most cases is, okay, 50%, 80% of people, and in this case, most of the people were more on the how the individuals have led. I'm adding Neil into that box because we've had this discussion before and I know his thinking on it, as opposed to the what they've achieved. But with most groups, typically, it's quite heavily weighted towards the 70% of people who will select reasons for what the individual has achieved as opposed to how they have achieved it. So it's a very, very quick little thing that we would use at the start of the leadership course to start people thinking, because typically you need people to start following you as a leader before you've achieved anything. So you aren't going to get people following you because of what you've achieved, because that lies in the future. You need to get people really starting to follow you because of how you're leading. And from that little very quick exercise on, we expand out and keep going. Okay, so interestingly, I know there's a point here. Yes, it does also, definition of success make a huge amount of difference as well. And I mean, that's something which, you know, is success down to money? Is it down to social impact? Obviously, it's up to each individual to define what success means for them. But as a group, and this is important for leaders, it's up for maybe the group to define what success means for them. And if the leader has some idea of success that everybody else doesn't have, then this photograph here might find that there's nobody following the person in front on the left, which means that person's not a leader. They're just somebody going for a walk on their own because the other people are walking a different direction. Okay, I think that's probably enough from me, Mary Eleanor, if we want to go and take questions.
Absolutely. So if there are any questions, please feel free to include them in the chat. Any questions about anything that we covered today, or any questions specifically about the certificate itself. So we'll just pause here for a minute and feel free to include any questions in the chat.
And while we're waiting for questions to come through, I just want to pick up on something John said about leadership and the how we lead part, because there really is a cultural element to that as well. And you know what Julie said about how we define success, different groups of people, including cultural groups, define success differently, and they place different emphases on the how of leadership. So the cultural piece does add another challenge to leadership, because that how is defined differently by the different groups.
Yeah, I mean, for leadership, Diane, there's a cultural component. There's another dimension you can segment it is based on race. There's a gender component, and particularly the domain of leadership, as is touched on in the course. It's predominantly been researched by white male, people like me. And as a consequence of which, there's a bias. There's a bias both in not just the individuals that we have seen throughout time as being those leaders who've been recognized and remembered, but also in the research about what leadership is and therefore how people should lead. It's been biased a lot, very heavily. US has been there, but Europe as well. So there's culture, there's gender, there's race, and leadership, it's a constructed thing. So it means something different for every individual. And therefore, the context is hugely important. So things like culture, it's vastly important. And really what we as individuals need to do if we want to become the best leaders we can be is to go out as broadly as we can and learn from as many different sources as we can and construct our own understanding of leadership and then lead accordingly. And if I just take 10 seconds to add to that, particularly important to remember the difference between leaders and leadership, because leadership is about relations, and without those followers, you can't be a leader. So the concept of shared leadership, distributed leadership, and even followership, which you can think of it being as something that's discrete, but it's also the other side of that coin. These are all really important to take into account if you want to be as informed in your leading as possible.
It's challenging to kind of unpack on the surface what might be the difference between leading and leadership. But I can see that, you know, leadership is not about perhaps leadership is not about the role, but more about the relationships as you described and as Diane reiterated.
Mm-hmm.
So I just am mindful of our time here, and there was a question posed in the chat about information on where we can find information on the courses and on the certificate itself. So I have shared that in the chat, and then also wanted to share that later today we will be sending out an email to everyone who was able to join us today on the webinar and those who registered for it but were unable to join us, with a recording, and then also with a link to the upcoming course that's part of the certificate called Mastering Strategy, which starts on January 6th. So keep an eye out for that email. And just want to take the last few moments to thank our panel very much for joining, Diane, Ian, and John. Really appreciate your insights and your contributions to this certificate, which will, I think, challenge those who enroll and in really meaningful ways that will have a long-lasting impact on their careers. So thank you all very much for joining us.